Matthew chapter 6, verse 25. Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more important than food, and the body more important than clothes? Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? Who of you, by worrying, can add a single hour to his life? And why do you worry about clothes? See how the lilies of the field grow. They do not spin or labor, or they do not labor or spin. Yet I tell you, not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, will he not much more clothe you, O you of little faith? So do not worry, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or what shall we wear? For the pagans run after all these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own.
Well, I want to begin this message with a little video of Evan Way, our worship pastor. He has a little man named George, who's maybe one of the cutest toddlers ever, and he captured George doing something I thought extremely poignant. Not only is it one of the funniest things I've seen, but I think that it will serve our message well. And before we show the video, I just want to set up what we're going to be dealing with today. Because when we read something like, do not worry, that's like telling a woman in labor not to have a baby, okay? Because worry is a part of the human experience. And we have to understand the context of this teaching of Jesus about anxiety, about worry. And the context is in the context of idolatry. If we begin with chapter 6 and we look at the beginning, what we have is Jesus challenging our motivations behind why we do the things we do. Don't do these things for the praise of people, which is the natural inclination of the human heart. Our desire, our need to be needed often turns into vain pursuits. Our need to be praised, our need to be loved turns into our need to be exalted. And those wrong motivations rob us of intimacy with God. When we have wrong motivations in spiritual disciplines, it's extremely damaging. When we are seeking man's approval through spiritual practices, such as generosity or prayer or fasting, that people might view us in a particular light, that's a particular idolatry. It's the deep idol of the need to be of power, of comfort, of love, to be appreciated and affectionate, turned into something supreme. And Jesus then moved into what we considered last week, which is the goals of our Christian life. And he says, listen, you need to be careful in what you are doing. Look at your life and what is it that you are doing. If you're driven by a need for the praise of people, then naturally you will turn to the world for all of your ultimate satisfaction. You're going to accumulate for yourself that you might be esteemed, but that accumulation leads to a mastery, and that mastery is a dangerous one. You will be mastered by the tyrant of a fickle world, of a fickle God. It says you give your affections supremely to the things of this world, and they're going to break your heart. He says if you give your vision, your focus, your attention to the things of this world supremely, you're going to go dark. He says if you pick the wrong master, and the bottom line is in life, we're going to have to choose a master. If you pick the wrong one, it's going to break your heart. And so now he's going to deal with, here's the outcome of picking the wrong master. Is that if you pick the wrong God, any false god, they tend to be fickle with us. It's hard to please false gods. I think false gods are very difficult to keep happy. If you are the center of your existence, very hard to keep you happy. If you turn your partner, your husband, your wife, your boyfriend, your girlfriend into a god, they cannot handle that kind of devotion, and it will be impossible to keep them or you happy. If you make material possessions your god, it's very challenging to maintain, to keep that satisfied, because there will always be a fear of losing it, or a fear of someone taking it away, or a fear of actually not even getting it. And you see, these gods, they're very fickle. And so what we start feeling in this idolatry is that these gods are hard to please. And because they're hard to please, we feel at any moment they might dispose of us. And here's the real rub, is that as Christians, because we all suffer from idolatry on some level, we take that grid of gods that are hard to please and we apply it to our God who loves us. And because the gods that we worship, I mean, you think about the Seahawks, they lose. People go into depressions over this. I mean, like full-blown, like, I can't believe it. I was in Madrid when they won the European Cup. They were flipping over cars. Their God was on top. But the moment their God's on the bottom, then they're like burning cars. You know, it's intense. But when we apply that to Jesus, when we apply the heartbreak of our idolatry, and we take the same kind of view that these gods are very unpredictable, what we do is we begin to view our faith in Jesus with that same sort of, does he really love me? Is his intention toward me actually good? I'm going through difficulty right now. I'm worried and I'm concerned, and it creates anxieties, and it creates a false grid, because the natural tendency of the human heart is to make God in our image rather than being made in the image of Jesus. And so I'm just giving you that as this little setup for this video. So if we can, this is what I think, to me, George represents our idea of God that is defined by the false gods that so quickly dispose of us. Okay, play the video. You're that green guy. There you go. Done. You're that guy too. No, I don't even like you. I don't like you. I don't like either of you. How amazing is that? I just could watch that again. I've just been looking for an excuse to use that video. Notice, with such precision, even when he grabbed two of them, he made sure that he shot them both before he threw them over his shoulder. Now that's amusing, but I just want to point out the obvious, that is how often we view God. When our performance is not what it ought to be, what happens is that we think that God is quickly over us, that he wants to dispose of us, because our experience with false gods has been that. And because of that, we live in an age where I believe anxiety has come to an all-time high. Depression and anxiety in our modern society is at an all-time high. It is unbelievable, the damage that we see happening in the world around us due to false worship. So what I want to begin with here is I want to basically define worry. Because, and so as we approach this, the reason I began with that story and even that video is I want you to keep in context, this is about idolatry. It's about giving our affections to things that we have no control over, giving our affections and making supreme the things of this world, and our need for approval from people, and how extremely damaging it is to us as human beings, how deadly it is, how paralyzing it is. And so I want to begin with the definition of worry, because I think that we use worry very loosely in our age, and we need to be careful to not have this text say what it is not saying. Worry, just in the Oxford Dictionary, is to give way to anxiety or unease. to allow one's mind to dwell on actual, and this is very important, to actual or potential, that is, not real, or problems that might or might not come. This is worry when we allow ourselves. And so look at the synonyms: to fret, to be concerned, to be anxious, to agonize, to overthink, to brood, to panic, to lose sleep, get worked up, get stressed, get in a state, stew, torment oneself. Most of us have experienced these things at one time or another. But I really like the second definition of worry, which until I had looked up the definition of worry, I actually had never even heard this in my life. Have you guys heard about a dog worrying about a bone? Who uses that? So archaic. And it kept coming up, and I'm like, I'm pretty sure I spelled worry right. But when you look at what the definition is a dog tearing at, gnawing on, or dragging around with the teeth its bone. I found my dog contentedly worrying a bone. I would never say that. But I think that the imagery describes the damage that worry can do upon the soul. Because does it not tear at us? Does it not gnaw on us? Does it not drag us around with its teeth? It creates what psychologists call a bandwidth tax. It's that your mind is like a computer. It only has so much CPU, and worry has this way of causing that breakdown, of where the mind becomes so taxed with the problems that it's experiencing that it can think of nothing else. And instead of moving forward in life, in living, you become frozen by the anxieties that we are beset with. And this is something that is all around us. In fact, man, if you just type in a Google search, anxiety, and only do a search for that which has come online in the last year, it's insane how many articles, Huffington Post, New York Times, Psychology Today, CNN. I mean, it's endless because depression and anxiety is an all-time high in human history. One psychologist stated that social media is one of the key things that's linked to student anxiety, that 40 million adults in the U.S. suffer from an anxiety disorder, one of the most common mental health problems on college campuses. And this psychologist, Lori Andrews, she said that young adults today face more competition and stress in school and the workplace than previous generations did. She said, adding that social media may intensify anxiety. It keeps them thinking that they're left out, that their life isn't the same. Andrew said, Facebook is an image, like watching a romantic fantasy. People only put the very best thing that happens at the moment. It just sets up the pressure of anxiety more than it does benefit. You think about this, what she is ultimately saying, if she was a Christian, she would say, the rise of the ego and the movement toward an individualistic way of viewing life, that I am the most important thing in my existence, puts us at odds with the world. And the need to consistently compare ourselves to others and to create some sort of vision of ourselves that can compete with a world that will forget us as quickly as it knows us. I just read an article today that Rihanna, at the peak of her world tour last year, this was an interesting one, has become increasingly paranoid, even when every concert she played around the world, every coliseum was totally sold out. She was absolutely convinced that her fans could turn on her at any moment, and she became increasingly paranoid and reclusive at the fear of losing her fame. You see, even if you get to the very top, you then have to protect what you have. And if you're Rihanna, all you have to do is look at Lady Gaga and see that she was the top, and now she's the joke. New York Times said that Lady Gaga's newest album is like watching a scene from Spinal Tap. And this is the reality. You see, our false gods are fickle. New York Times, I looked earlier, praised Lady Gaga for being brilliant a new innovator. Not since David Bowie have we seen such creative innovation in pop music. But this is our world. It's crazy. And Lady Gaga's crazy. And yet these are the things that we elevate. And they just give us a picture, a glimpse into our lives and the ways that idolatry creates massive anxieties and pressures upon us. And Jesus is trying to protect us from this. When we consider the reality of worry, we have to begin with the question, did Jesus ever worry? Because he says here, don't be anxious, don't worry. But I do want to show you something that we do worry. It is natural to worry. Jesus, in John 11, verse 33, it says when Jesus, his friend had died, and when Jesus saw his sister weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. He was worried for them. Notice the worry, though. Where is it directed? What was the concern? Was it self-centered? No, it was other-oriented. Look at Mark 14:33, though. This one actually is self-concern. And he took with him Peter and James and John. This is the beginning of the Garden of Gethsemane. And he began to be greatly distressed and troubled. Very real fear over the physical reality of what he was going to face. And the spiritual reality, the depths of being the world's sin bearer, it created distress and trouble, real worry, real anxiety. But the powerful thing about the Garden of Gethsemane story is that Jesus, in the face of death, he admits his worry, his concern, but where does he take it? He takes it, this is in the context of his prayer life. This is him taking that fear directly to his Father. And what's fascinating is what he does in the garden, he never shows to the world when he's being crucified the next day. Jesus took his fears to the only place they were safe to take. And he says, Father, if there's any other way, just show me. But then he says, not my will be done, but thy will be done. And you see that Jesus always had an other-oriented mindset, even in worry. So worry is natural. The question isn't, do you worry or do you not worry? It's a sin to worry. It's you're really doing good if you never worry. No, the question is what do we do with our worry, and what kind of worry are we dealing with? So I want to begin with this verse right here, the outcome of disordered love, because this is the outcome of it. And the reason I use kind of pop culture illustrations, because we're not dealing with the crowd that Jesus spoke to. He was speaking to a crowd of peasants who hardly had anything, who were literally wondering, where will I get food? Where will I get clothes? Where will I get drink? But he's still saying the principle's the same. If you are self-focused, you will lose sight of the meaning of life. Your world will become increasingly small, and you will become devastated by that kind of idolatry. In fact, not only will you continue in your poverty, but you will actually have no means of getting out of it, because the more inward we turn that bandwidth tax, we become taxed mentally by the fears that capture our hearts and minds, and it immobilizes us, becomes paralyzing. We get caught in the web of worrisome ideas and a mindset where now it's difficult to perceive what is actually true or what isn't true. And so Jesus is saying, listen, therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life or what you will eat or what you will drink, nor about your body, what you will put on. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothing? So here he's speaking to a group of peasants who have next to nothing. But what does this say to us? Because I just apply these things to a group, because you can apply it both ways, to a group who actually has everything. And the thing is we still worry about these things. Our worry isn't based upon the natural need for nourishment or the natural need for covering. Nobody was worried like, Jesus, if you don't provide clothes, I'm going to have to go to church naked. Nobody thought that today. But we may have thought what I thought, which is, if I don't wear the right shirt, hence the leopard spot shirt. that I got for Christmas, and my daughter told me it was unchristian. And I actually don't know what she meant. I don't know if she just meant it was tacky or, and then I go, what do you mean by that? She goes, trying too hard, Dad. Trying too hard. This is the outcome of disordered love, okay? I'm like that dad. It's like, do you think I'm cool, kids? No, we're anxious about what we wear. But you think about it. Think about the two-dimensional realities of most lives in American culture. We're so given to materialism and to vanities. We're so driven by the external. It's not that the external doesn't matter. I think it's very dangerous to try to diminish the need for the external and create this dualistic tension where the only thing that really matters is the spirit. That's not true. We are body and spirit. But when we give all of the emphasis to that which is outside, what we do is what we're really revealing is that deep idolatry, that desire for approval of others, giving ourselves away to what people think of us. And this is what we do. We worry about what we're going to eat. I just read this thing today. One of the greatest causes of anxiety and that mental bandwidth tax is actually dieting. It's a major anxiety. Do you know how many, I can't tell you how many people I meet who are beautiful people, healthy people, who say disgusting things about them. They see themselves as ugly. They see themselves as, if I can only lose, 10 more pounds, then I'll be that ideal self. What's driving that? It's not, most of our exercise and our dieting is not driven by a desire to be healthy. It's a desire to be physically appealing to others. When I diet, I just want to look better in my jeans. Let's be honest. At 41, and my metabolism continuing to slow down. When I buy clothes, I'm not thinking, I do know people in the church that really don't care. And I always appreciate them and scorn them for not caring enough. But I do think that there is, it's that whole thing. It's like, my son is awesome. He doesn't really care. He's starting to care a little bit, but he'll go with comfort over style anytime. But I remember even in my teens, I would wear the most uncomfortable thing if I thought it was stylish, and I did not care if it was uncomfortable because I was so deeply insecure, so driven by a need to be loved, so broken in the broken relationships that I'd come out of. This is a reality. And so we are anxious. We're not anxious for the same reason that maybe the crowd that was listening to Jesus was anxious, but we're anxious nonetheless, and it's driven by the same sort of deep self-centered desires that Jesus is trying to protect us from. He says, listen, when you are concerned with maintaining some sort of vanity before others, it's keeping up with the Jones. It's impossible. And in today's fickle world, it's like the moment you think you know what's in, it's already out. And now it's hard to know what's out and what's in because everything's so mismatched. It's very stressful, really. All of it's very stressful. I'm like, I thought you're like, what? I just got a stocking cap and a flannel shirt. I thought the 1898 thing was in. No, it's gone. It's done. Stop it. Shave off your mustache, boys. We're over it. If you're under 30, don't have a mustache. Only Ron Swanson can have a mustache, in my opinion. So you don't. This is the thing. Is why do you do that? Listen, if you're 22 and you have a mustache, I promise you're not doing it because you're like, I just want to be a working man. That's not why you're doing it right now. That's not why you're doing it. We want to fit in. We want to fit in. And the thing is that the longer we maintain that kind of thing, it's driven by an idolatry that often makes us the joke. And it breaks our hearts. The esteem of the world is temporary. And I think that Jesus is trying to drive us to what is our master. When our values, when our vision is given to the things of this world, we come under the tyranny of the false god who is utterly fickle with us. and destroys us and creates all sorts of anxieties around us. Because if you have everything that you want, then you're worried about losing it. If you don't have what you want, you're worried about not getting it. And these things destroy our ability to live with God in the moment. And if we give ourselves to them, even when we try to live with God, we apply that grid to Him and think He's as fickle as everything else. The wrong concern leads to a two-dimensional existence. I read in this article in the New York Times about anxiety, describing it. It says, anxious thoughts are radically personal thoughts. Their central concern is what affects you, what threatens you, what you need, you regret, you dread, you fear. Anxiety is a condition of near total self-absorption, made only worse by the fact that the sufferer typically realizes that he is being self-absorbed and grieves over his sad inability to see past himself. And this was written by a man who had clinical anxiety, speaking very honestly about the tax that it placed upon his very being. And it was in the context of his sabotaging a relationship with a woman that he loved, because his anxiety created insecurities and just this up and down roller coaster emotional upheaval in the relationship that almost destroyed the relationship, and how he worked toward overcoming that, moving past the self. You see, Jesus, He's the ultimate. He already knew this was an issue. And He says, you got to look at where your priorities are. You got to look at what is the center of your affection. Where is your supreme love? Because if your supreme love is God, then the other things of life can take their proper place. Even Paul said this in Galatians chapter 1, verse 10. Here's the catch for us, guys, is that when we fall into the trappings of idolatry and we worry about what we eat, what we drink, what we put on, we're totally concerned with the vanities. Women who give themselves over to just the false ideas that the world has presented to them as beauty. Men and women do this. This deep desire to live up to the standard of the stars with their personal trainers. You know how many women I've met with eating disorders in this church? What does that say about where our vision is? Culture is eating us alive, guys. And as followers of Jesus, we've got to get back to what actually satisfies the human soul. That we need the praise of God, not man. In fact, Paul says in Galatians chapter 1, verse 10, "For am I now seeking the approval of man or of God, or am I trying to please man? If I were still trying to please man, I would not be a servant of Christ." And this is the reality. You can't serve Jesus and be a people pleaser. You can't give yourself to that idolatry. And I would say people pleaser, I would include the narcissism of trying to constantly please yourself. If central in your affections is not Jesus, your life will not have equilibrium. So we look at this verses 26 and 27, this paralyzing. So I'm going to ask you the questions because he uses these beautiful illustrations from nature, and I think he paints the picture of the distinction between paralyzing worry or trusting work. Look at the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not of more value than they? And which of you, by being anxious, can add a single hour to a span of life? This is not a passage about you trust God and you will never be hungry, because there are lots of Christians all over the world that actually starve to death. This is not a passage about birds that don't die of starvation. What Jesus is saying is that birds fulfill the thing that they were created to do. They don't sit around and analyze their ability to do or not do something. They work with an unconscious faith, if you will. They live and exist as they were intended to exist. Do birds worry? Gary Breshears goes, you need to tell them to worry like a bird. And I'm like, well, what do you mean by that? And I'm like, I don't like how it sounds. But but I'll use the idea. He says a bird is always looking over its shoulder for a cat, but it's not worrying about, I wonder if I will find food today. It just works until it finds it. Jesus uses a picture for us, is that he wants us to move toward that childlike faith, an unconscious faith. What's fascinating is that worry about provision actually, it creates that freezing effect where we become immobilized by a fear, whereas in trusting God and stepping out in faith and trusting him with the outcome actually causes us to step out and begin to work. This isn't about, hold still and trust Jesus. This isn't calling us to some sort of passive laziness in life. The birds are hard workers. They build their homes. They never stop doing what they're created to do, which is survive. And yet we, as we are given the gift of being made in the image of God and being meant for relationship and the ability to think abstractly, even to think about ourselves, a self-consciousness is one of the greatest gifts and the greatest curses, because under the fall, self-consciousness becomes a very damaging reality, where all of a sudden now I'm paralyzed by my own fears of things that might or might not happen. Have you ever had your work suffer due to fear that was not even based in any sort of rational reality? I have. And Jesus is saying that often that fear is driven because you have the wrong affection. You have the wrong thing being supreme. If we trust God with our lives, it allows us to face even difficulty with a new kind of hope, a new kind of confidence. And he said, listen, and this is so true, we know actually scientifically that anxiety does not add to human life. It actually takes years off life. It can kill you. It literally can kill you. There is a book actually by a psychologist called Why Zebras Don't Have Ulcers. And I think he's really playing, I think he's stealing from Jesus. I think Jesus should have gotten royalties on that idea. Because this could have been why birds don't have ulcers. But his point with zebras is that under distress, they either have two options. They run and get away, or they're eaten. But you see, we don't run away and we're not eaten, so then we just are left to worry. I might be eaten. And if I run, what if I don't run fast enough? And so this contemplation, the paralysis of analysis, as it's called, is a very reality. So I just asked you the question: if you want to be a high-functioning person in this world, we've got to have the right master who can energize and bring real meaning into our lives, and we have to trust him implicitly. But faith is not just a mental belief that God is. Faith is action. It's obedience that derives from a dependence, a trust in my Father. Faith is like my daughter's willingness to fall backwards, probably 20. If I told her to jump out the upstairs window into my arms out of the house, she would, because she thinks I can do anything right now, which is awesome, and I hope she always does. But I think this is the reality. It's like, as you get older, when she was 2, she would have for sure jumped. Now she would think about it. Like, I wonder if Daddy really would catch me. And I think that this is that whole reality, is that we step out in faith and we trust God. Will he really show up? And as I trust him with that childlike faith, then I'm able to begin to move toward an existence that's meaningful. It gets me out of my head and outward toward the reality. Here's the thing about worry. Jesus never says, don't worry about others' food, drink, and clothing. I think that's an important point. We should be worried a lot about other people in need. I think if we spent more time worrying about others' needs, we would probably find our needs being met. Really. Here, I love this one. Do you live with a self-conscious vanity or a believing freedom? And why are you so anxious about your clothing? Why do you care whether your shirt is in style or not? Why do you care? Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. Yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass of the field, which today is alive and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, will he not much more clothe you, O you of little faith? Once again, he's like, why do you concern yourself? Why the self-conscious vanity? And I love that he starts with the beauty of flowers, but also the temporary nature of them. And I think that this is that self-conscious vanity is driven for us. Why do we concern ourselves about how we look and how we appear and how we act around one another? And we're driven by this desire to keep happy our fickle gods. And what happens is that they quickly lose interest in us. And the thing that we thought would make that God happy, the thing that we thought would feed that idolatry in our heart, it changes so fast. We can't keep up with it. It's here today and it's gone tomorrow. We see the exaggeration of a character like Rihanna, but we're so much like that. So often our anxieties are driven by a deep despair that I cannot make these people love me. I can't. It's just self-focus, self-concern, self-worry. But Jesus keeps calling to us. He says, "Come to me, all you who are weary. And I'm going to give you rest because I love you. I knew what I was doing when I made you. I love you with an everlasting love. Why do you sit and toil and spin and give yourself to things that only will break your heart when I want to take your broken heart and build something beautiful and solid out of your life? As long as you're living inwardly, your days will be dark and filled with much concern and much anxiety." This is why the psalmist said, "Lord, don't give me so much that I forget you or so little that I curse you. Just keep me from deception. Keep me honest." And this is the reality, is that we can't make ourselves as beautiful as the flowers in the field. And even if we could, the flowers wither and die. And Jesus says, once again, stop living with a self-conscious vanity. I want you to be free from the tyranny of that which is temporary. That is one of the gifts of aging, by the way. Because ultimately, time wins. And that's why there is such a worship of youth in our culture. It shows the worship of youth, that which cannot be maintained or sustained. And yet, because we live so externally, we become two-dimensional, shallow. We have no depth of character, nothing to offer others, because we spin our wheels on things that we can't even keep up with. Self-conscious vanity, and it enslaves us. But to have God as the central desire of the heart, it brings liberty. Liberty. First things first. Therefore, do not be anxious, saying, what shall we eat? What shall we drink? What shall we wear? For the Gentiles seek after all these things. Hey, your heavenly Father, God knows that you need them all. But seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. What does it mean to seek the kingdom of God? Is that you are seeking a king, Jesus, because he has sought you. That you are coming under his rule and living according to his ways. And his righteousness being played out in your life means that you then become a conduit for his love, which draws other broken and lost people into the goodness of who God is. But if we are self-concerned and self-absorbed, one of the most heartbreaking things for me is to see Christians continue year after year just racked with self-deception and self-absorption and just the uselessness that their lives are in regards to actually helping others. And if that's you today, you're paralyzed by that. Jesus loves you. He wants to set you free. I don't say that to be mean to you. I don't say that to be cruel. I'm saying that there's a better way. You want to begin to heal and move out of that, then you begin to give yourself away. Giving yourself away is not self-eradication. It's a redirection of energy which brings about actually self-discovery. We become the persons that we're intended to be. And he says, seek first this kingdom, which means that you trust God with your whole life, that you become a covenant partner with him, that you make his concerns your concern, his ways your ways, that you spend time having your mind shaped by his word, as I've been encouraging and challenging the men every morning, that we allow God's thoughts, the mind of Christ, to become established in our minds. And when we do that, then all these other things, then we begin to see things for what they really are. I love beautiful things. I like clothes. I like pop culture. I like music. I like dancing. I like all those things. I have no problem enjoying those things as long as they aren't my God. I also know that those things can be taken from me as quickly as they're given to me. I also know that the shirt that I love this week may not fit me next week. You know, our vanities around food. I mean, have you ever seen that Jim, what's his name, Jim Gafferty? Have you seen his thing on Gaffigan? Have you seen his thing on McDonald's? There's the shame around McDonald's, but secretly we all actually love it. It's like, no, we don't. Actually, we don't love it. And he just show, it brilliantly sketches the vanity of our culture, the snobbery that is really just a cover for the idolatry that is breaking our hearts and creating so much worry. Seek the kingdom. And then we just need one day at a time, guys. One day at a time. I think that one of the great tragedies in our current age is that so often we are devastated by the mistakes of yesterday, and we are haunted by the fears of the unknown tomorrow. And when we live between those two thieves, we become crucified without any ability to actually enjoy the only place where life can be truly experienced, which is in the moment. Not only is it the only place where life can be experienced, it really is the only place where Christ can be experienced. If our concern is always around us, if it's always this direction, how am I perceived? What do others think of me? What shall I wear? What shall I eat? Then we become that. Our world begins to shrink down. But when our vision is vertical and our love is horizontal, it goes outward. Our life just becomes full and robust and meaningful, and the ability to live in the moment becomes an actual reality. What I love about this men's study right now, that just 22 days, every day, being forced to do the same thing. I have to get up every day at 3:30. I have to be here to make coffee every day at 5:30 a.m. I have to prepare a sermon every single day. And I'm just like, oh man, it seems so enslaved. Don't you feel claustrophobic? No, I feel more free than I felt in years. Because my life right now can't be. I actually made it impossible for it to be about my needs. And I was like, weird, I feel so happy. Why do I feel happy on 5 hours of sleep at night? Because I don't need as much sleep because I'm not as worried. I don't need to go out and buy things because I don't have the time or energy to do it because I'm actually thinking about what am I going to feed those guys tomorrow. I don't have time to do a lot of the things that I did that were so useless because the little time that I do have is I want to spend it with my kids and my wife. And you see, all of a sudden, these things are taking. I made Jesus the center, and all these other things in my life just start to take immediate place. When I have too much free time, I start doing all kinds of stupid stuff, and then I start being selfish, and then I stop meeting the needs of others, and then I frustrate my wife and my children. I lose sight of what God's called me to as a pastor. Oh, we need to make Jesus the priority in our lives. It's not self-forgetfulness, but it is putting away selfishness. You guys, I leave you with this thought. I went through 8 months of severe anxiety, and I know how immobilizing it is. And it happened here at this church where every day for 8 months I broke down in tears multiple times a day. Some of you walked through that with me and actually saw behind the scenes while the church was growing and thriving and it was exciting and new. All I could do was to get through my day was just to put one foot in front of the other. And I was terrified and I was immobilized, and it was all due to idolatry. And it created very physical and mental realities. The anxiety turned into insomnia. I didn't sleep for 8 months. I was going on about 2 to 3 hours a night, which makes you even more unstable. I began to believe a lie that my wife didn't love me because my idolatry was the need for the approval of men. I felt that the church was my problem, and then I began to put that pressure on my wife, and that surface idol of my wife being the source of my comfort, to feed that deep idol of comfort, turned into my wife pulling away from me because I was suffocating her. And as she pulled away from me, then I began to become delusional, and I'm like, Darcy doesn't love me. And every day I felt like I was going through a heartbreak. Every day. Worship practice. Guys, just a second. I'm going to go to my office. Go to my office. Sob for a minute and then come down and do worship and then preach to you guys. And it was terrifying. Terrifying. But I remember the day Jesus set me free. I remember fasting for 2 days and 2 nights at a cabin on the Deschutes River, and I walked out into a field, and God gave me a vision of my life since I met him. I fell down on the ground, and I screamed at God, why would you let me go through this? How can I lead the church and feel like this? I was emaciated. I was down to like 165 pounds, which is, for me, really light. and I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. And I was acting like I had gone through a divorce. I mean, I was just like devastated, like a child had died or something. I'd go to play with my kids, and I couldn't even think about them. All I could think about was this false idea that I was losing my wife and losing my mind and losing the church. And that immobilizing reality was unbelievable. But that moment in the field when I cried out, God showed me my life for the last 14 years of being a Christian. And I just saw this uneducated punk who was self-centered and reckless with people's lives, being radically saved by Jesus, being given this incredible woman to walk through life with, Jesus saving my wife, Jesus giving me a son, Henry, and a daughter, Hattie, bringing me into ministry, giving me songs for the church, and being able to travel around the world declaring his goodness, starting this incredible church Door of Hope. And it's like I realized that self-absorption in those fears and the thinking that I was responsible, it created in me an ungrateful heart. And the last loss of gratitude turned in upon itself, and I lost sight of Jesus. And he showed me, and I just cried out, Jesus, thank you. And I said, Lord, thank you for this anxiety. I pray, bring me through it. I trust you to get me through this. And when I came through it, I just said, Lord, it's the greatest thing that ever happened to me. I say that honestly. I don't want to go through it again. But because I went through that anxiety, it gave me an empathy that was not there for others before I had it. So I want you to hear me when I talk negatively about the negative impacts of the self-absorbing realities of unhealthy, self-focused worry. It's only because I've been there. And I want you to know, because I know there are many of you experiencing it, there's freedom for you. Jesus wants to set you free from that. Listen, he says there are worries that we do have to deal with today. So why are you worrying about tomorrow? The thing that he promises is not to remove our troubles, but to walk through our life with them. Come to Jesus. He's the only God that can handle our worship. He's the only one that can set us free from anxiety and bring us peace, satisfaction, ultimate meaning. And the things of this world will grow strangely dim. Amen?